If you want to learn about investing opportunities in Africa and in African companies, then you found the right channel. We're going to be talking all about what stocks you could invest in and what companies look investable and just investing opportunities in general here. So hit that subscribe button if that interests you. But for this video, I want to give you a big background analysis on Africa's current state and how it seems to be moving forwards. There's a ton of information here, and I really spent a lot of time researching and making this video, so please hit that like button, and again, please subscribe if you find it helpful. I really appreciate it. So what are the first words that come to mind if you were asked to describe the continent of Africa? If I had to guess, I would say things like barren deserts, corrupt governments, violence and bloodshed and war, and systemic poverty. And no, that's not all wrong, but Africa is a lot more complex than this and has the potential for tremendous growth and development in the next few decades, a place you seriously might want to consider investing. Here are some cool stats you might find interesting. There are 54 countries in Africa with over 1,000 languages spoken. The current combined population of over 1.2 billion is expected to double by 2050. Africa has an area of 11 million square miles, which is larger than the US, China, India, Japan, and much of Europe combined. More than 80% of Africa's population growth in the coming decades is expected to be in cities. The median age of the population is 20, and it will soon have a larger working age population than India or China. Smartphone usage will soon be over half the population, over 600 million owners. There are over 400 companies that earn over 1 billion in revenue a year. Africa has the largest reserves of rare minerals in the world and also tremendous amounts of oil. So first, in this video, I want to share with you why I think Africa has tremendous opportunity to grow and develop in the coming decades. Secondly, I will go over many companies in Africa that might be worth investing and that we will probably discuss in this channel. And finally, I will share with you some of the things that Africa will have to overcome to completely move forward from its challenging past and why we still need a lot to happen. And most importantly, what is being done to combat this. First off, one thing that needs to be addressed is the coronavirus pandemic of 2020. This is going to have effects on the global economy for several years and is clearly going to affect Africa in some ways. Perhaps not as bad as more developed nations, and it's hard to predict, but for this analysis, I'm going to be mostly considering that the global economy as a whole will have declined uniformly due to the pandemic. That said, I've heard estimates of millions of Africans being pressed into poverty because of this virus, so this is definitely not something to be overlooked, but for now it's hard to know for sure. So you can see from this chart here that Africa's GDP has been growing tremendously. And between 2000 to 2010, their GDP grew at a powerful rate of 5.4%, which was the highest region in the world except for Asia. Between 2010 and 2015, these numbers declined precipitously to 3.3%. But the decline is pretty misleading because it was mainly due to the Arab Spring incident, which was a democratization movement by North African countries, which hurt their economies. The GDP decline was also due to weakness in the oil market. And when combining these two groups, it accounts for 60% of Africa's GDP. So clearly the motive for this decline was not a fundamental change in Africa's position in the economy. One stat you should take away is that in the rest of the continent, the average rate of growth actually increased during the 2010 to 2015 period, from 4.1% per year during the 2000s to 4.4% per year. And since 2010, the economies that have been slowing down are actually among the biggest countries. Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Algeria, Morocco, and Angola are some. But some of the biggest growing economies are Botswana, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Gabon, Ghana, Kenya, Madagascar, Namibia, Senegal, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. So there's a lot of variety here. But overall, Africa's GDP is growing rapidly and is expected to continue to expand faster than the world average. And we will soon see what this will look like in the post-COVID world. One major part of this is the urbanization of Africa. Africa is urbanizing the quickest out of all other regions in the world. Over the coming years, there will be a massive migration to cities, resulting in more than 150 million Africans transitioning to urban areas. Will this stat be skewed by coronavirus? Perhaps. But I would say this trend is likely to continue after we get through the pandemic. According to Lines in Africa report in 2016, between the years 2015 and 2045, an average of 24 million people are expected to move to cities each year. This is good for business and overall economic health because urban areas are obviously associated with progress, innovation, and production. And taking a look at that chart shows the impressive extent of the growth here compared to other regions and countries. Another major catalyst for Africa's growth is the massive increase in Africa's workforce. Like I said earlier, Africa has a very young population, which is growing explosively. So by 2034, they will have a working age population of 1.1 billion, which would be larger than either China or India. And hopefully Africa will be able to grow proportionally to accommodate the amount of jobs that will be needed. And they are currently on track to do so. And so, with the growing workforce and urbanization, we also expect to be witnessing a continual development of Africa's technological capacities throughout more undeveloped countries. Right now, smartphone ownership is around 50% compared to 18% in 2015. And this ability to be connected to the internet is going to boost sectors like online banking, retail, e-commerce, healthcare, education, and much more. And with companies like Starlink that SpaceX is behind, this will only continue to grow. The thought of there being a more powerful cellular connectivity available uniformly for everyone would be a huge catalyst for development. Finally, Africa also has an insane amount of resources available in such a vast land. They have 60% of the world's unused cropland and the largest reserves of minerals like vanadium, diamond, manganese, phosphate, platinum, cobalt, aluminum, chromium, and gold. With 10% of global exports in oil coming from Africa and 9% of copper and 4% of iron ore. So the availability of these resources will likely continue to attract companies as Africa continues to develop. For example, cobalt is needed for EV batteries, and the Democratic Republic of Congo has the world's largest cobalt resource. So obviously many companies would be interested in mining there. Another positive statistic in Africa right now is the increase in consumer and business spending, which has a 4 trillion opportunity to be exploited. This has a lot to do, of course, with Africa's population growth in general, but also the tremendous urbanization and people's incomes rising enough for them to be able to spend money on other goods and other needs like water and food and shelter. Africa's growth rate in consumption spending has increased the second most out of any region in the world except for Asia, and it is expected to reach 2.1 trillion by 2025. Interestingly enough, most of this will be spent on basic items, but the amount of money Africans are spending on discretionary items is accelerating. Small companies in Africa also have a lot of opportunity for growth in the coming years because they have become more and more important to the function of the economy. For example, small and medium-sized companies, SMEs, are responsible for 77% of jobs in Africa, and 60% of business-to-business spending comes from companies with less than 500 million in revenue. A lot of these small companies are going to be integral to Africa's future growth. And looking at this chart here, you can see other than South Africa, small companies, which are the blue lines, are a dominant portion of the business spending in African countries. Africa's manufacturing growth is also something to be really excited about. Africa is expected to be increasing its manufacturing output significantly in coming years, which could grow from 500 million to between 700 or 900 million by 2025. This is also going to create a lot of jobs, which will be instrumental in growing the economy. 70% of production in the past years has been for the country itself, and only 20% was exported out of Africa. The fact that Africa also imports a third of its food, beverage, and other processed goods it consumes, and also imports 2/3 of advanced auto parts like cars and machinery, shows that there is a lot of room for growth here. And if they can start manufacturing many of these products internally, they would be very well set for growth. Morocco is a good example of what needs to happen, evident by them multiplying their export revenue by 12x from 2/5 billion in 2004 to 5 billion in 2015. And they had an annual growth rate of 26% over this time. Renault and Pugo car companies have invested more than $2 billion to create assemblies for 650,000 cars and 200,000 engines a year. And overall, Africa could increase export revenue by greater than $100 billion by 2025. And 75% of that could come from exports and more advanced manufacturing products like cars and chemicals. And another big motivator for manufacturing in Africa is the cheap labor costs. Also worth noting is that Chinese companies handle 12% of Africa's industrial production. And the fact that leading a country like China is using Africa for manufacturing is very good for them, because they will hopefully gain some of the benefits of being involved with a good, nice, big player like China. The advantages with smaller companies certainly exist, but one of the most important catalysts for emerging out of Africa's most stagnated and poor areas is for big companies to have a trickle-down effect on these areas. Half of the continent's big companies are based in South Africa. Currently, there are around 700 companies with annual revenues greater than or equal to 500 million, and 400 of those earn more than $1 billion. Around 40% of these 700 companies are publicly listed. Family-owned businesses are around 20 to 30%. 27% are multinational corporations, and the rest are large domestic companies or state-owned enterprises. Interestingly enough, 70% of revenue today comes from non-resource sectors: wholesale and retail, food and agriculture processing, healthcare, financial services, light manufacturing, and construction, as you can see in this graphic right here. So, with a lot of reference to the Lions in Africa report by McKinsey Global Institute, as well as the book Africa's Business Revolution, which is linked in the bio below, these are some main indicators I see that could propel Africa and its countries into being a more serious economic force in the coming years. Now I want to talk about the most exciting part, which is the specific companies in Africa that I find interesting, and some of which we will talk about on this channel. First, I'm going to introduce one of the biggest and most popular ETFs that exist for investing in Africa's companies. Then I'm going to introduce some companies that are not in the ETF but are worth noting. And finally, I'm going to introduce some established companies in other parts of the world that have involvements in Africa that might be worth investing in. So here we go. First off, we're going to be looking at the Van Eck Vectors Africa Index ETF, or AFK Index, with ticker symbol AFK. So this index goes back to 2008 and tracks many different African companies, a total of 74. The performance has not been what you would expect, with a 4% loss since its inception. The fund also has an average PE of 12, and as you can see, we've got a chart of the different sectors it's exposed to, with basic materials and finance at the top, and then communication services, consumer discretionary, and consumer staples, and then really small percentages are healthcare, real estate, industrials, utilities, energy, and then cash. The top 10 countries are listed here, with South Africa, Morocco, Nigeria, and Kenya taking a very large share of it. And since there are so many companies I will be introducing in this video, I will wait to do separate videos analyzing each one in the future instead of doing it here. Otherwise, this video would be well over 3 hours. So starting from the biggest holding in this index, we have Naspers Ltd, then there's Safaricom, then Atajuriafa Bank, Maroc Telecom, Anglo American PLC, Barrick Gold Corp, Guaranty Trust Bank, Banque Centrale Populaire, Commerce International Bank Egypt, and MTN Nigeria Communications PLC. So these top 10 constitute just about 50% of the index. But because we will likely look at other companies over the course of this channel, I'm going to briefly name and show you the other 64 companies. So we've got Ivanhoe Mines, Zenith Bank, First Quantum Materials, Equity Group Holdings, I Am Gold, Golden Agro Resources, Endeavor Mining, Make My Trip, Kasumar, Nestle Nigeria, Standard Bank Group, First Rand, Goldfields, East African Breweries, China Molybdenum, Bank of Africa, Anglo Gold Ashanti, Sanlam, Impala Platinum Holdings, Anglo American Platinum, MTN Group, Centamin, Sibanye Stillwater, Royal Caribbean Cruises, ABSA Group, Capitec Bank Holdings, Vodacom Group, ShopRite Holdings, Clicks Group, Bidcorp, Rimgrow, MultiChoice Group, Discovery, Bidvest Group, B2 Gold, Sasol, Aspen Pharmacare Holdings, Old Mutual, Harmony Gold Mining, Skatex Solar, Northam Platinum, Growth Point Properties, Kumba Iron Ore, Mr. Price Group, Needbank Group, Woolworths Holdings, Spar Group, Tiger Brands, Avi, Rand Merchant Investment Holdings, Exera Resources, MetaClinic International, Focini Group, Investec, Life Healthcare Group Holdings, Pick and Pay Stores, Momentum Metropolitan Holdings, Netcare, Fortress REIT, Coronation Fund Managers, Redefined Properties, Resilient REIT, Delta Corp, Cassava SmartTech, and other cash. One thing I want to say about the ETF and the poor performance you've seen is that it shows Africa is in fact a developing region that still has enormous potential for big change. If that graph was exponential, it would imply that maybe you've missed out on the big growth opportunity. That said, there's nothing to say Africa won't continue to struggle for many years, and it likely will. But I think it is inevitable in some sense for it to slowly emerge out of the darkened state it's been in. So now I want to talk about, or at least mention, some companies that weren't mentioned previously, and some of these aren't yet publicly traded and some are. So firstly, we have Mera Group, a company worth over $1 billion, which operates in 25 African countries. Comcraft Group is a mechanical and industry engineering company whose CEO is Manu Chandiria, a famous Kenyan businessman and billionaire. Econet Global is a telecommunications group with operations in Africa, Europe, South America, and East Asia Pacific Rim. It has several subsidiaries with deeper connections in Africa we can discuss in future videos. Africa Development Bank is a company that has been investing in Africa's infrastructure and energy system. GZ Industries is a company that manufactures aluminum beverage cans in West Africa that is backed by international private equity firms. M-Kopa is one of the most exciting private companies for me. It is a solar energy company headquartered in Nairobi. Power Metal Resources, also known as African Battery Metals, is a mining company that is publicly traded on the London Stock Exchange. Randgold Resources was a very big South African-based mining company that was actually bought out by Barrick Gold in 2018, which is publicly traded. METL Group is a pretty big company based in Tanzania, operating in 11 African countries. The company is extremely diverse, with many operations like bicycles or food, or even selling things like cashews. JMIA Technologies, of course, is an e-commerce company based in Berlin, Germany, operating in 12 African countries. Ethiopian Airlines operates over 90 routes in Africa and beyond. They are a profitable company, but owned by the government. InterSwitch is another private company that really excites me. It is a payment processing company that is headquartered in Lagos. They've built up a network from the ground up in anticipation of a movement to digital money transactions. Zambi, finally, is based in Zambia and has impressive vertical integration within its food business, from raising cattle to operating refrigerator trucks to selling them in supermarkets. Now, for the sake of time, I'm just going to list some of the smaller startups that we might talk about in the channel. So we've got companies like Carrefour, iHub, Impedigree, BBOXX, D-Light, Paga, and Grow Intelligence are some examples. Now, let's talk about some bigger multinational companies that have some operations in Africa. So first we have Tolaram Group, a holding company based in Singapore. One cool thing is that it has the largest noodles brand in Nigeria. Then we have Renault, a French car maker that has many operations in Africa, especially producing vehicles in Morocco. IBM also is interesting with several data centers and research labs in Africa. GE, General Electric, does business in Africa as well and has invested in their infrastructure significantly. They have over 2,500 employees based there with revenues of about $3.7 billion and operations in 25 countries in Africa. Subway, the U.S. restaurant franchise, has put some focus on Africa as well, and they've also hired a considerable amount of Africans. Coca-Cola is an example of a company that has put a lot of focus into Africa and spreading their brand there. They employ more than 70,000 people there. 2U is an American education company that works with online learning and colleges it acquired. Get Smarter, which was a South African startup for 103 million in 2017. So they definitely are working together with that program. So look, there's a lot going on in Africa, a lot of development economically going on, but there's still a ton that needs to happen. Right now, there's not a lot of stability within their markets, and one year's earnings report could look a lot different from the previous year. I'm going to address this lack of stability and challenges that Africa faces now, and then I will give some counterclaims for how I think Africa might combat this. So first of all, one of the biggest concepts I want to say is that Africa obviously is not a country. Africa is made up of 54 countries, each with their own challenges and intricacies. That said, because of the general trends we have seen in Africa with political, economic, and social problems, it is appropriate in general in terms to speak regarding a broad Africa. So one interesting thing is that 9 countries make up 2/3 of Africa's total GDP. What does that mean? Well, it means most of Africa's countries are still remarkably underdeveloped and small. And ultimately, it shows Africa isn't symmetric, as I said. One major thing that Africa in general has to overcome is its lack of development and infrastructure, especially within electricity and energy availability. For example, 1/3 of African households lack access to running water, and 20% of businesses said bad infrastructure was their biggest challenge to opening a business. As far as electricity goes, in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Nigeria, electricity availability is less than 1/2 of that with respect to Brazil, Russia, India, or China. Another interesting stat is that in Mali, the typical house uses less electricity in a year than a person uses to boil a kettle in London. And with 15% of the world population, Africa only uses 0.75% of the worldwide energy total. And overall, nearly 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa lack access to electricity. That is huge. Many companies exist with half their lives in darkness. This hurts businesses tremendously, with 1/3 of executives saying their companies generate their own power and generators, which actually ends up costing over 3 times as much as you would pay in a classical electrical grid. Demand is only expected to increase for electricity, with an anticipated 4x need between 2010 and 2040. Agriculture is also something that needs to improve, with Nigeria, for example, that has 30 million small farmers that produce 90% of the country's output, but they only produce enough for themselves. 85% of Africa's farms take up less than 5 acres, so there's a lot of subsistence farming going on in Africa, not large-scale farming that really they need. Nigeria, which has 90 million acres of land, relies on imported food, which is pretty sad. Corruption is also a huge problem in Africa. Corruption has increased over recent years in contrast to improvements in governance, and it's estimated that the cost of corruption costs 150 billion a year in resulting setbacks. A survey by Afrobarometer says that 33% of people from 35 African countries said they have paid a bribe to the government. And Transparency International says that roughly 75 million people in Africa have paid a bribe in the last year. These are really concerning numbers and reflect the political state African countries have been burdened with. Poverty is also a really big problem in Africa. For example, in Nairobi, there's a huge contrast between poverty and wealth. Karen, which is 10 miles from downtown, has houses worth more than $1 million, as you can see here. And then just right next door, we have Kaiberia, the poorest place in Africa, with little electricity, limited water, and bad sanitation. According to Brookings.edu, 1 out of every 3 Africans lives below the global poverty line. They make up more than 70% of the world's poorest people. As far as schooling and education goes, the average time in school in Africa is 5.3 years in 2020. And emerging regions spend comparatively between 7 and 8 years. This needs to change because by 2021, half of the jobs will be skilled entry-level positions. And this is not going to qualify most Africans. According to the Borgen Project, over 1/5 of children between ages 6 and 11 and 33% of children between the ages of 12 and 14 are out of school. So yeah, there's a lot of things that Africa and its countries will have to overcome to emerge as a developed region with a serious economy. But I think that a lot of things are happening right now in Africa's favor and slow changes that will eventually change this region. Poverty, for example, fell from 56% to around 35% from 1990 to today. So that's definitely showing there's been some progress. According to Brookings.edu, poverty is decreasing in Africa. And if you look at this graph here, you can see this expected decrease. By 2030, Africa is expected to reduce their extremely poor by 45 million, and poverty is expecting to decrease to 24% over that time frame. So we are seeing a decline, but I am sure, although, that COVID will push these numbers back. Education has also been improving somewhat, with school enrollment rates in 11 African countries between 1999 and 2012 increasing by 20%. Also, nonprofits and other programs are helping to provide alternative training to help Africans get jobs and become productive members of society. And I really think that the push for urbanization and industrialization will boost the economy and foster the development of schools in cities. And it's moving in the right direction. For example, Africa spent 80 billion in 2015 on infrastructure, which is more than a 2x from the first 6 years of the 2000s. China's eagerness to use Africa for manufacturing is good because it motivates them to want to help improve things. In 2015, China's government-based institutions contributed more than a fourth of the total infrastructure investment in Africa. And another interesting stat is that by 2030, there will be 89 cities with a population greater than 1 million. As far as governmental issues, African governments have generally become more business friendly. For example, African governments have helped streamline businesses with reforms to reduce permit processing times, increase transparency, and risk-based compliance processes. So basically more business-friendly approaches. And they also added the tripartite free trade area, which has been ratified by 24 countries and is great for business cooperation. And I think one way to look at this is that just like Africa has dry deserts, jungles, and snowy mountains, the political, economical, and social states vary depending on the country and area. These countries have a large hole to dig themselves out of. I believe as the world continues to develop technologically and economically, Africa as a whole will develop as well. And one interesting thought is that only a handful of African countries perhaps might succeed in fully emerging and becoming global economic forces. And then the remaining countries continue to develop at a slow rate or don't even develop at all. But who knows? My whole point is there's so many ways this could go. But for me, my plan is to keep watching and looking at bigger African companies that have proven success despite the variability and instability within the region, and have also been able to successfully grow into operating in many African countries. These types of companies are interesting to me and definitely a way to invest in Africa. So in this channel, we'll be talking about all the different ways to invest in some of these companies. But for now, I'm really excited for this channel in the future. And if you've actually made it this far in this video, congratulations, because it's a long video. And comment below right now, investing in Africa. I'm curious how many people actually made it all the way to the end of this video. So congrats if you did. But for now, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on future videos, and especially if this channel interests you. And also consider liking this video. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to embarking on this journey with you.